Let me start with something simple, and I promise this is going somewhere worth your time. You are wrong about a lot of things, so am I, so is every person alive who has ever looked at a piece of information and decided they understood it fully. This is not an insult. This is the most important thing anyone has said to you in years. And the reason it does not feel that way is the exact problem we are going to spend the next 30 minutes or so pulling it apart. There's a specific kind of comfortable wrongness that modern life has perfected. It is not the wrongness of ignorance. Ignorance is forgivable. The wrongness I am describing is the kind you chose. The kind where the correct information was available and you bypassed it because the incorrect information made you feel better. Because it confirmed something you already believed. Because the algorithm knew you would click on it. So it put it in front of you and you clicked it and you kept clicking. And somewhere in that loop, the distinction between what you were told and what actually is true stops mattering. That is the crisis, not politics, not social media, not the news cycle. The crisis is that most people have lost the ability to tell the difference between a feeling and a fact. And they have done it so gradually that they do not notice the absence of the skill. Here is a fact that takes most people a beat to absorb. Stress and deception share identical physiological signatures. Hear that again. When your body is lying, it produces elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, respiration, avoidance of sustained eye contact, and muscle tension. Where your body is terrified of being falsely accused of something, it produces elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, respiration, avoidance of sustained eye contact, and muscle tension. Blah, blah, blah. The nervous system does not distinguish between these situations because the nervous system does not care about narrative. It cares about threat. And both scenarios register as a threat. This is not a controversial finding. Researchers at the University of Portsmouth, among others, have spent decades on the science of deception, and the consistent conclusion is that human beings are barely better than chance at identifying when someone is lying. We hover around 50% accuracy under controlled conditions. A coin flip is 50%. We are statistically almost as useless as a coin flip. Body language, the industry, exists anyway. It thrives, in fact. There are best-selling books about micro-expressions. There are seminars, certifications, weekend courses. There are YouTube channels with millions of subscribers dedicated to frame-by-frame analysis of public figures' facial movements, concluding with absolute certainty whether someone is honest or deceptive based on where their left eyebrow rose a millimeter before they answered a question. This is astrology with a better prediction value. I am not being glib. The comparison is structurally accurate. Both systems offer a feeling of interpretive power over the information that is actually random or complex. Both systems can absorb any data point and make it fit the existing framework. He looked nervous, so he's guilty. He looked calm, so he's a psychopath. She cried, so she's manipulating. She didn't cry, so she's cold. The system cannot be wrong because every possible outcome confirms it. That is a diagnostic feature of pseudoscience and body language analysis, as popular practice meets every criterion. Yet, we have built courtrooms around this intuition. We have structured interrogation techniques around it. We have fired people, ended relationships, destroyed reputations, and made irreversible judgments about other human beings based on the sensation that we could read their body language and what it was telling us. And we were wrong. Systematically, consistently, demonstrably wrong. The reason this matters beyond the academic is that every one of us is being on the receiving end of someone else's false read. You have told the truth to someone who did not believe you, and you know how that feels. You know the closed loop of it, where every attempt to demonstrate innocence is read as further evidence of guilt? You know that experience. Now multiply it, put it online, give it an audience of millions who have been primed to expect a specific conclusion, let it run for years. That's not a hypothetical. That's happening to real people right now. Let's talk about how information actually travels, because most people have a functionally incorrect mental model of this, and it's costing them dearly. When something is shared widely online, most people interpret it as evidence of its importance or truth. They operate on an unconscious assumption that there is filtering in that process, that the things reaching large audience earned their reach by being accurate or significant. This assumption is wrong in a way that is too fundamental to convey. The systems that determine what you see online are optimizing for one variable: time on platform. That's it. Not accuracy, not social good, not even entertainment in a meaningful sense. They just want you to stay on the app as long as possible because every additional second you spend generates advertising revenue. Everything else is downstream of that. And the single most reliable way to keep a human being engaged? Outrage. This has been measured. Researchers at NYU in the Center of Social Media and Politics found that content containing moral outrage terminology on X received roughly 20% more engagement per retweet than neutral content. And that exposure to such content further increases users' likelihood of producing similar content. The machine is not just showing you outrage, it's teaching you to produce the outrage. The philosopher Marshall McLuhan has a line that has outlasted most of his contemporaries. The medium is the message. He meant the delivery mechanism shapes the content more fundamentally than the content itself. He said that in the 1960s about television. He did not live to see what the internet would produce with the idea. But if he had, I think he would have had said something along the lines of, "I told you so, and it's worse than I imagined." We build a global information infrastructure that rewards the most emotionally activating version of any story. We then acted surprised when most emotionally activated versions of stories became the dominant version. We then expressed outrage about misinformation using the same channels that systematically incentivize misinformation. And the outrage was itself monetized. And the cycle continued. You are not a passive victim in this. That is the unforgivable part. Every time you engage with content that confirmed your worst suspicions about a person or group, you participate in the system. Every click told the machine that this is what you want more of. Every share extended the reach of the story that may or may not have been true. And at the point of you sharing, you probably did not check if it was true. Nobody checks. Checking is friction. Friction kills engagement. The system is specifically designed to reduce friction between impulse and action, between seeing something and spreading it, between having a feeling about someone and rendering a verdict about their character. This is not a bug. This is architecture. Here's something historians understand that most people outside the field do not. Moral panics are not new, and they follow a pattern so consistent it's almost boring. In 1692, 20 people were executed in Salem, Massachusetts, on testimony of children who said they had been visited by spectral apparitions, ghosts. The accused were, without exception, individuals who had existing social tensions with their accusers, people who were economically inconvenient, or people who had previously challenged the community's power structure. The evidence was impossible to refute because it was spectral, meaning it only existed in testimony of the person claiming to have witnessed it. Denying it was taken as further proof of guilt. 150 years later, in the antebellum American South, the mechanism was updated but structurally identical. Accusations that could not be verified were treated as confessions. Emotional intensity was treated as evidence. So just being really angry, that's proof. The crowd's certainty was treated as verdict. Many people died. Move forward to the 20th century and the McCarthy era, which targeted roughly 10,000 American citizens for alleged communist sympathies, many of them destroyed professionally and personally, the majority of whom were never charged with anything criminal. The accusations spread through networks of mutual reinforcement where accusing someone was itself a form of status protection, and defending the accused was treated as suspicious. The internet did not invent the mob. It gave the mob a keyboard and a distribution network. What is different now is the permanence. A pamphlet from 1692, Salem required physical reproduction to spread. A rumor in 1952, Washington traveled at the speed of social circles. A false accusation in 2024 travels at the speed of light. Indexes permanently in search engines and can be surfaced in my mouth is so dry. In perpetuity. I should have brought water. By anyone who searches a name. The correction, if it ever comes, travels to a fraction of the audience it originally claimed to reach, and it arrives without the emotional charge that made the original so sticky. This asymmetry is a structural feature, not an accident. Misinformation reaches have documented it thoroughly. A study published in Science in 2018 by Vozuhi, Roy, and Arol analyzed 126,000 stories shared on Twitter over more than a decade and found that false news traveled significantly faster, deeper into networks and to more unique users than the truth. The effect was most pronounced for political content. The emotional novelty of false stories drove the disparity. True stories on average were boring. The structure of human memory compounds this. We disproportionately remember information encoded with strong emotional valiance. The more visceral the content, the more durably it lodges. Which means the false but emotionally intense story has a neurological advantage over the true but measured correction. Not just algorithmically, but biologically. You are always going to remember the accusation more vividly than the exoneration. Your brain was built that way before the internet even existed. And the internet found a way to use it against you. There's a word worth knowing here. Epistemic closure. That's 2 words. It means the condition of having organized your information environment so thoroughly around your existing beliefs that no new information can get in the word to challenge them. It is the intellectual equivalent of buying blackout curtains so you can pretend the sun does not exist. Psychologists refer to the underlying process as confirmation bias, which most people have heard of and believe they are immune to. This is itself a manifestation of confirmation bias. The research on this unambiguous and uncomfortable topic is in a classic series of experiments by Lord, Ross, and Lepper, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Participants who had a strong opinion on the death penalty were shown 2 studies, one that supported their position and one that contradicted it. Every participant rated the study supporting their position as methodologically superior, regardless of the actual research quality. Both groups became more convinced of their original positions after reading both studies. More information made them more entrenched, not less. This is your brain on certainty. Certainty is comfortable. Uncertainty is metabolically expensive. The brain has a strong evolutionary presence for the cheaper option. And when you have already paid the social cost of taking a public position on something, revising that position becomes doubly expensive because you are now also paying reputational cost. The result is, as a species, uniquely capable of sophisticated reasoning and uniquely reluctant to apply it when the stakes are personal or tribal. When we decide someone is bad, we do not update that belief in proportion to new evidence. We file contradictory evidence under the heading of things that do not fit and leave it there. We call the person who presents the contradictory evidence biased. We call the evidence itself suspect. We find reasons to discount it that we would never apply to evidence that it confirmed our existing position. And we do this while sincerely believing we are reasonable people. That gap between what we believe about our own reasoning and what our reasoning actually looks like is where most of the damage in this world gets done. Let me tell you a story about a group of regular Americans trying to do the right thing. In 1932, a man named Bruno Hauptmann was tried for the kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh's infant son, one of the most sensationalized criminal cases in American history. The public had already decided, the newspapers had run months of coverage presenting him as an unambiguous guilty person. By the time the actual trial started, the verdict had already been rendered in the court of public opinion. The jury sequestered in Flemington, New Jersey, was made up of people who had been reading those newspapers, hearing those conversations, absorbing that certainty the way you would absorb the smell of something when you walk into a room. Hauptmann was convicted and executed. Jesus Christ. Historians and legal scholars have debated the case for nearly a century. The evidence examined at distance was more circumstantial than the public had admitted. The wood expert who identified pieces of the kidnapping ladder as much as wood from Hauptmann's attic was later shown to have dubious credentials. We will never know the truth. That is the one point. Now, here is the part nobody talks about. Being a juror is supposed to be the gold standard of fair evaluation. 12 peers, adversarial process, rules of evidence, reasonable doubt. It is the most carefully constructed truth-finding mechanism Western legal tradition has developed over centuries, and it is still susceptible to what happened in Flemington, New Jersey, because it's operated by human beings who absorb a world before they walked into that courtroom. A black defendant facing an all-white jury in Alabama in 1940 did not lose because the evidence was against him. He lost because 12 people had spent their entire lives being culturally programmed to reach a specific conclusion, and the room where truth was supposed to live was already occupied by something else. We have not fixed this. We have not adjusted it at the margins. The unconscious bias documented in mock jury studies are numerous, consistent across decades of research, and stubbornly resistant to instruction. Telling people to be fair does not make them fair. It makes them feel fair, while being exactly as biased as they were before. The honest response to this is not cynicism. It is humility. It is holding your certainty more loosely, especially when the object of your certainty is a person, especially if that certainty was formed quickly, especially when it was formed through channels optimized to generate conviction rather than accuracy. There is a version of speech, absolutism, that sounds principled and is actually just a strategy. It works like this. Loudly champion the abstract right to speak freely. Then methodically use your social, institutional, and economic pressure to silence specific people whose speech you find threatening. This is not a left-wing or right-wing trick. It is a human trick. Every tribe does it. Every coalition that has ever formed around a shared belief has used the machinery of social consensus to define what is speakable and by whom, and then gotten genuinely offended when someone pointed out the mechanism. The internet made it more visible, not worse. Or maybe it made it both. What we have now is an environment where the formal right to say things is largely intact in most democracies, but the practical ability to say things that challenge dominant narratives is actively suppressed through non-government channels like demonetization, deplatforming, algorithmic suppression, advertiser pressure, a mob organized around hashtags. These are not censorship in the legal sense, they are censorship in the functional sense, as the distinction matters less to the person who lost their platform than it does to the legal theorist. The honest position on this is whoever is in power will define the boundaries of acceptable speech. What should actually concern us is not who is winning the speech wars today, but in fact, that we are building the infrastructure for speech control that will outlast whatever political alignment currently controls it. Every tool for silencing voices you dislike is a tool that can be turned on voices you like the moment the political wheel turns. Every precedent set for removing someone from a platform because the crowd found them objectionable is a precedent that will be applied inconsistently, arbitrarily, and inevitably to someone who did nothing wrong. This is not theoretical. The tools get reused. They always get reused. Let's talk about what happens to people whose cultural moment passes. In 1987, a musician named Rick James was one of the most commercially successful artists in America. By 1993, he had largely faded from mainstream relevance. What happened between those years was addiction, legal trouble, and the kind of personal catastrophe that the entertainment industry treats as interesting when you are ascending and as evidence of character when you are not. In 2004, thanks almost entirely to a comedy sketch, Rick James became a relevant person again as a punchline. People who had not thought about him in a decade suddenly had an opinion about him, formed entirely from the frame of a joke, without any particular interest in who he actually was or what his music was. He died the same year. I'm not using this story to generate sympathy for Rick James specifically. I'm using it because it illustrates something that keeps happening and that we consistently fail to examine. The entertainment and the internet attention economy creates a version of a person, extracts the maximum value from that version, discards it when it's no longer profitable, and then occasionally retrieves it as a vehicle for nostalgia or mockery, whichever generates more engagement. The actual person is irrelevant to the process. That is the has-been trap. It is not about being past your prime, whatever that even means. It's about being a version of yourself that someone else created and owned, and then living the wreckage that they created when they're done with it. The view count question is related and also misunderstood. 2,000 views is not failure in any absolute sense. 2,000 people is a packed theater. Jesus, that's quite a theater. 2,000 people is more than those who attend small concerts, more than who show up to most public lectures, more than those who typically gather at community events. We only interpret it as a failure because we are comparing it to numbers generated when the algorithm was actively amplifying our content, which it was doing because the content was useful to the platform, not because it was intrinsically more valuable. Those numbers that get celebrated online are almost entirely artifacts of platform decisions, not quality assessments. Misinformation with algorithmic wind, as its back reaches more people than careful journalism, that does not trigger engagement signals. A false accusation that generates outrage reaches more people than a carefully accounting of facts that generate reflection. This is not because outrage is more true. It's because the machine is not measuring truth, which means using platform metrics as a proxy for human worth is one of the stupidest things we can do with this regularity. And we do it constantly, including to ourselves. The world of narcissism and the word narcissist has become functionally meaningless. And it's not an accident. Clinical narcissistic personality disorder is a specific, diagnosable, rare condition characterized by grandiosity, lack of sympathy, exploitive behavior, and profound fragility beneath a confident exterior. It is estimated to affect somewhere between 1% and 2% of the general population, with higher concentration in certain occupational contexts. This is what concept inflation does to language. It takes a word that meant something specifically useful, and it stretches it out until it covers so much territory that it covers nothing. When every difficult person in your life is a narcissist, the word has done no diagnostic work. You have not identified a pattern or found an explanation. You have found a label that makes your frustration feel clinical and therefore inarguable. The people who use the word most freely are often describing behavior that looks from the outside less like the clinical condition and more like something defending themselves. Because here's something that the actual clinical literature on narcissism will tell you. Genuine narcissists do not experience the kind of sustained emotional distress at external criticism that they project outward. The person screaming in the comments that someone else is a narcissist, the person whose identity is visibly organized around the designation of others as broken, the person who requires a villain to feel coherent about their own goodness, that profile is much closer to what researchers are actually describing than the person they're pointing at. This is uncomfortable to say, but it's also true. The double standard built into the accusation is the tell. A narcissist, in a clinical sense, applies one standard to themselves and another to everyone else. They require empathy but cannot supply it. They demand understanding for their position while refusing to consider the position of others. They imagine themselves in every role except the role of the person who caused harm. Before you apply the word to someone else, it costs you nothing to spend 30 seconds applying it to yourself. On to AI. The Luddites of the early 19th century in England were not stupid. That is part of the Luddite story that almost never gets told. They were skilled craftsmen, highly trained weavers whose expertise took years to develop, whose identity was bound up in that expertise, and whose economic security depended on it. When the textile mills automated their jobs, They did not resist technology out of ignorance. They resisted it because they understood with complete accuracy that it would destroy their livelihoods, concentrate wealth into the hands of the mill owners, and leave them with nothing equivalent to replace what they lost. Their analysis was correct. The industrialization of textile manufacturing did, in fact, do what they feared. The weavers who held out lost anyway. The word Luddite became a slur, meaning someone too dim to understand progress. The historical Luddites were not dim. They were right about the costs and powerless to stop the future. The AI resistance happening now shares a structural similarity and diverges in important ways. There are people who object to artificial intelligence on legitimate grounds, labor displacement without adequate social infrastructure to absorb it, copyright questions that have not been resolved, the environmental cost of large-scale computation, the concentration of this technology's development in very few hands. These are serious objections. Then there are people who object to AI because it's new, and the newness produces anxiety, and anxiety produces the kind of moral certitude that feels like principle. Calling AI-generated content slop in the absence of any engagement with what that content actually is not a critical position, it's a reflex. Here is the unsparing reality. Every major technological transition in human history has been preceded by confident declarations that this new thing was inferior, dangerous, and antithetical to real human values. The printing press would destroy memory. They thought that. They thought the printing press would destroy memory. And the careful hand of the scribe would also be destroyed. Photography would destroy painting. Cinema would destroy theater. Television would destroy cinema. Personal computers would destroy genuine learning. The internet would destroy attention spans. I don't know about that last one. That one might be a little accurate. Some of these partially happen. Most did not. What actually occurred every time was a reorganization of a landscape in which some skills became less necessary and other skills became more so. The difference is not the tool, it's the person holding it. There is also something worth saying about what the AI hate reveals about the people expressing it. When you watch someone produce 20-minute short film alone using tools that a decade ago would have required a production team of 20 people and a budget of several $100,000, and your primary response is contempt, ask yourself what that contempt is protecting. It's usually something small. It's usually the feeling that your particular mastery of the old way deserved a performance it was never going to have. That feeling is human and understandable. It is also not a useful basis for aesthetic judgment. Now, let's move on to optimism. Kevin Smith had a heart attack in 2018. He came out of it publicly, committed to radical positivity. He wrote about it, talked about it in interviews, and described the experience as transformative and clarifying. I do not know Kevin Smith. I am not qualified to evaluate his inner life. What I can engage with is the cultural script that near-death experiences reliably activate, and that's the one that says surviving a brush with mortality should convert you to gratitude and presence and the warm conviction that what remains of life deserves to be saturated with appreciation. The script feels true. It shows up in the memoir after memoir, podcast after podcast, motivational framework after motivational framework. The near-death epiphany is practically its own genre. What the script leaves out is the possibility that for some people, the opposite orientation is not failure of psychological development, but is an honest accounting of experience. There is a strand of thought running through Marcus Aurelius, through Schopenhauer, to the contemporary Stoics, that does not ask you to feel better about things that are genuinely bad. It asks you to see clearly, which is sometimes meaning seeing that things are bad and to act appropriately given that clarity rather than generating feelings that obscure it. The memory research on positive effect is actually interesting here. Human beings tend to remember emotionally intense experiences more vividly than neutral ones. Trauma studies have consistently shown that people who have experienced severe adversity often have higher resolution recall of the worst periods, while more pleasant times in their lives blur together. This is not dysfunction It's adaptive. Your brain disproportionately preserves information about threats because threat information has higher survival value. The implications that a life organized around avoidance of negative emotion may paradoxically leave fewer distinct memories, fewer vivid impressions of actually lived. That's a thing. This is not an argument for the manufacturing of suffering. It's an argument for being suspicious of cultural mandates towards relentless positivity, which often functions less as genuine well-being guidance and more as social pressure to perform an emotional state that makes other people more comfortable. The people who say life went by in a blink and they barely notice is not necessarily telling a success story. They may be telling a story about disassociation, about a life spent slightly above the surface of their own experience, buffered by enough pleasantness to never have to go deep. None of this is a prescription, it's an observation. Some people thrive on what you could call earned stoicism. Not the pose of stoicism or the aesthetic of it, but the actual practice of sitting in reality as it is, rather than as you would prefer it to be. It is not comfortable. It is, by many metrics, not even happy. It is, for certain people and certain lives, the only honest way to proceed. Here's what I actually believe at the bottom of all this. Most people are not bad. They are not evil. They are not engaged in a conscious project of harm. They are creatures shaped by evolution to be tribal, to be energetically conservative in their reasoning, to seek comfort and avoid metabolic cost of genuine uncertainty. They are fed every day through machines they carry in their pockets and precisely calibrated diet of content designed to keep them engaged through emotional activation. They form beliefs the way people catch colds, not through intent, but through exposure. They defend those beliefs with full force of their identity because it's what the identity does. And they destroy people with it, not maliciously, casually. The way you destroy a reputation is the same way you destroy a lake ecosystem, not through a single dramatic act, but through 1,000 small contributions that each seem negligible and together become catastrophic. One share, one comment, one decision to not check, one moment of choosing the satisfying story over the uncertain truth. The correction for this is not to become cold or withdrawn or stop caring about things. It's one habit. Before you participate in the circulation of information about a specific person, ask yourself what you actually know. Not what you heard, not what feels true, not what everyone agrees on, what you actually know from primary sources with enough context to be meaningful. Most of the time, the honest answer will be not much. Like, I don't know anything really. That's not much worth protecting. The space between what you know and what the story tells you is where the truth actually lives. And it's being colonized every day by content designed to eliminate it. I'm not asking you to trust people you have reason to distrust. I'm asking you to be rigorous about what counts as a reason. I'm asking you to remember that the person on the other side of the accusation is a person living inside the consequences of what you repeat about them, regardless of whether or not you think of them as a real person. We're all going to be forgotten eventually. Every version of this, every version of that, every version of anything that exists online will eventually fade away. Every comment, every take, every document, every moment of certainty that felt like righteousness, all of it will be gone. The only thing that will have mattered, if anything matters, is whether you treat the people around you as people, including the ones you were told not to treat as people. That's not idealism. It's like math. Someday it will be you. And when it is, you will want someone to ask the same question.